A limestone fragment sits in a vault at the shrine of the book in Jerusalem. The catalog reference is 4Q216. It is one of 15 fragments of the Book of Jubilees pulled from the caves at Qumran between 1947 and 1956. 15 copies. That number matters. It is more copies than were found of Joshua, more than Proverbs, more than Ecclesiastes, more than Chronicles. Of all the texts preserved in those caves, only Psalms, Deuteronomy, Isaiah, Exodus, and Genesis were copied more often than the Book of Jubilees. The men who hid those scrolls in the desert cliffs above the Dead Sea considered Jubilees important enough to copy 15 times. The church that came after them removed it from the Bible entirely. What it contains is the reason. Jubilees was excluded from the Western canon at the Council of Laodicea in 364 of the Common Era, the same council that removed the Book of Enoch. It was banned, buried, called secondary. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, operating independently of Rome since the 4th century, kept it. They kept it inside the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion, in Aksum, and in monastery libraries in the Tigray Highlands, where it remains part of their biblical canon of 81 books today. Before you watch further, this channel exists to read what was removed. If that work matters to you, subscribe now. Every week, another sealed text. But here is what makes Jubilees different from every other banned book. It does not just describe what happened in the story. It names the place where it happened, a specific mountain, a specific location on a modern map, a place where the physical evidence of the event was still standing when archaeologists arrived in the 19th century, a place you can look up, fly to, and stand on. And it is a place where something has been happening in the last 7 months that nobody in this niche has connected to the text. Not yet. The Book of Jubilees was written in Hebrew, probably in the mid-2nd century BC. The Dead Sea fragments place it at least as early as 125 BC, making it older than the destruction of the Second Temple, older than Roman occupation of Judea. James Vanderkam, the Notre Dame scholar whose work on Jubilees is the academic standard in English, found that the Ge'ez translation preserved by the Ethiopian Church matches the Qumran Hebrew fragments with unusual precision. What survived in Ethiopia is what the original said. Jubilees presents itself as a revelation given to Moses on Mount Sinai by an angel called the Angel of the Presence. It covers the same ground as Genesis and the early chapters of Exodus, but it fills in what Genesis omits, the genealogies between the lines, the names the biblical text does not give, the reasons behind events Genesis records without explanation. And then it comes to the passage the church did not want read aloud. Chapter 4, verse 15. A short line. The translation from the Ge'ez reads directly, "In the days of Jared, the angels of the Lord came down upon earth, those who are named the Watchers, that they should instruct the children of men, and that they should do judgment and uprightness upon the earth." Read that again. The Watchers came down to instruct. This is where Jubilees contradicts what you were told about the story, and why it was banned. Because in the version most people know, from the Book of Enoch, the Watchers descended because they desired the daughters of men. Their descent was a rebellion from the first moment. The fall and the desire were the same act. Jubilees says something different. Jubilees says they were sent. The original mission of the Watchers was legitimate. They came down as teachers. The corruption came afterward, when the mission broke. That single detail changes the entire theological structure of the story. If the Watchers were sent, then God commissioned a descent to this mountain. The mountain is not just where a rebellion happened, it is where a divine mandate was issued, accepted, and then violated. Now we need to look at the mountain. The text of Jubilees names it. 1 Enoch chapter 6 verse 6 names it. The Aramaic fragments from Qumran name it. Across every manuscript tradition, the location of the descent is the same. The summit of Mount Hermon, in the days of Jared, whose name in Hebrew means descent. Mount Hermon is not a metaphor. It is a geographic feature at 33.4 degrees north latitude, sitting at the convergence of three modern national borders. Israel, Syria, and Lebanon all claim a piece of this mountain. Its highest peak reaches 2,814 meters above sea level. It is the tallest mountain in the Levant. You can type its coordinates into Google Maps right now. You can book a flight to Tel Aviv and drive north, but the name is what stops you. Because the name is the confession. The root of the word Hermon in Hebrew is herem. The word herem carries three simultaneous meanings: a sworn oath, a sacred ban, something devoted to destruction, and something removed from ordinary use and given entirely to another order. All three meanings are in the name of this mountain. The mountain is named after the event that happened on it. The oath sworn there named the place. 1 Enoch 6, verse 6 records what the oath was. Semjaza, their leader, said to the 200 who had gathered, "I fear you will not agree to do this act, and I alone will pay for this great sin." They swore together. They bound themselves with a curse that meant if any of them pulled back, the guilt fell on all of them equally. Then they descended. That is why the mountain is called Hermon. That is what is in the name, and here is where it stops being textual history and becomes something that a British military engineer accidentally documented in 1869. Charles Warren was a royal engineer, later to become chief commissioner of the Metropolitan Police during the Jack the Ripper case. In December of 1869, he climbed to the summit of Mount Hermon as part of a survey expedition for the Palestine Exploration Fund. What he found at the summit was a rectangular stone building sitting on an oval stone plateau without a roof. He described it as the highest ancient temple ever documented. He called it Qasr Antar. In the northwest corner of the oval, Warren found a limestone stele. He broke it into two pieces for transport, carried it down the mountain, and delivered it to the British Museum in London in 1870. The stele sat in its crate, unopened, for 14 years. When it was finally translated in 1903, the inscription was in ancient Greek. George Nicholsberg, whose commentary on 1 Enoch remains the scholarly standard, translated it as follows: "According to the command of the greatest and holy God, those who take an oath proceed from here. Those who take an oath proceed from here. On the summit of the mountain named after an oath. In a temple built on top of a structure from an earlier period. A temple whose approach path forces every visitor into an anti-clockwise spiral around the peak. A deliberate ritual path that architectural historians cannot explain as structural necessity." The British Museum translation of the same inscription reads differently. Their version includes a negative that Nicholsberg's does not. The British Museum text reads, "Those who do not take the oath." One word. One word in ancient Greek, the particle ou, meaning not. Two serious scholars, one inscription, two opposite meanings. That debate exists. It is documented in peer-reviewed scholarship, and what it tells you is that whoever erected this stele was making a statement about an oath sworn at this specific location, in either direction. Either those who took an oath left from here, or those who refused the oath were excluded from here. Both readings require an oath. Both readings require this location. The argument is over what happened next. Nicholsberg formally connected the inscription to the oath of the Watchers in 1 Enoch 6, verse 6. He published that connection. It is not fringe speculation. It is in the academic record, and it raises the question that none of the permit applications around this mountain have ever fully answered, because here is what Jubilees adds that Enoch does not. Chapter 8, verse 3. After the flood, in the generation of Noah's sons, something is found, a stone. On the stone, inscribed, is astrological knowledge, and the text says directly, "This is the sinful teaching of the Watchers." Someone before the flood carved it into rock, and someone after the flood found it. At the summit of Mount Hermon. At the site archaeologists have confirmed was used for ritual activity across multiple civilizations: the Phoenician period, the Hellenistic period, the Roman period, and earlier. More than 24 temple sites on the slopes and summit of this single mountain. No other peak in the Levant has this density of documented sacred sites across this span of time. The teaching was carved in stone at this location, according to Jubilees. The stone building Warren found in 1869 was Roman in construction, built on top of something from an earlier period. The earlier period has not been excavated. What is underneath the Roman temple at Qasr Antar has never been excavated. The Israeli Archaeological Authority manages the southern slopes. The summit was until recently in a UN buffer zone established after the Yom Kippur War in 1973, monitored by the United Nations Disengagement Observer Force. The UN has maintained the highest permanently staffed position in the world at the summit of Mount Hermon since 1974. No excavation of the summit temple has been conducted. The reasons given are jurisdictional. The summit sits on the boundary between Israeli-controlled territory, Syrian territory, and Lebanese territory. Access requires permissions from multiple governments that have been in varying states of military conflict for 50 years. That is what blocked access until December of 2024. On December 8 of 2024, the day Bashar al-Assad's government collapsed in Syria, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the Israel Defense Forces to take control of the summit of Mount Hermon. 9 days later, on December 17th, Netanyahu stood on the summit personally and delivered a statement. In January of 2025, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz declared that Israeli forces would remain at the top of Mount Hermon indefinitely, not temporarily, not as a security measure pending another arrangement. Indefinitely. Defense Minister Katz used a specific phrase about why. He said Mount Hermon had returned to Israeli control after 51 years. Not that it had been secured, that it had returned. The mountain is now under the control of a single government for the first time since the Yom Kippur War ceasefire. The UN post at the summit is restricted. UNDOF, which had been conducting 50 to 60 daily operational tasks, has been reduced to 3 to 5 essential logistics movements per day. The summit of the mountain named in the text. The summit where the inscription about an oath was found. The summit where the oldest temple in the ancient world sits on top of something that has not been excavated. The access that did not exist before December 24 now exists. And the question that the Book of Jubilees has been asking for over 2,000 years is still unanswered. What was originally carved in stone at this location? What is underneath the Roman construction at Qasr Antar? What did Jubilees chapter 8 mean when it said the astrological teaching of the Watchers survived the flood, preserved in rock, and was found afterward? Jubilees does not say the Watchers succeeded. It says their mission broke. The chapter that names the descent also describes the judgment that followed. The Watchers were bound. Their offspring were destroyed by the flood. And Enoch, who in the text had been placed in the Garden of Eden to keep writing, testified against them. There is a phrase in the Transfiguration account in Matthew that scholars of Second Temple Judaism treat as a deliberate inversion. Jesus is at Caesarea Philippi, which sits at the southwestern base of Mount Hermon, when Peter makes his confession. 3 days later, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up a high mountain by themselves. Matthew says a voice from a cloud speaks. Moses and Elijah appear. The mountain that Matthew calls high and does not name is the highest mountain in the immediate geography, the highest mountain above Caesarea Philippi. There is no other candidate that satisfies both the elevation description and the proximity. The mountain where the Watchers descended in transgression, where the oath that gave the mountain its name was sworn, becomes in the Gospel account the site where a voice from a cloud speaks over Christ. The site of the original broken mission becomes the site of the testimony to the restored one. That is in the text, both texts, and neither church council ever explained why it was there. 15 copies of Jubilees were preserved in 5 caves above the Dead Sea, more copies than Joshua, more than Proverbs, more than Chronicles. The men who hid those scrolls treated this book as essential. The Council of Laodicea in 364 removed it from the Western canon. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept it for 1,700 years inside monastery walls. The summit inscription sits in the British Museum, translated 2 different ways, by 2 different scholars, debated in peer-reviewed journals for over a century. The temple at Qasr Antar stands on the highest point of the mountain, named in the text. It was built on top of an earlier structure. That earlier structure has never been excavated, and as of July 2026, the summit of Mount Hermon is under indefinite military control by the State of Israel, with restricted UN access, for the first time since 1974. The mountain is still there. The inscription is still in London. The text is still in 15 fragments in Jerusalem, more copies than most books that made it into your Bible. The oath site is occupied. The earlier structure is still unexcavated. The question Jubilees has been asking for 2,000 years has not been answered, and the only text that names this mountain as the place where the mission broke, the text that says the teaching was carved in stone and survived the flood, is still sitting in a vault, in a language most people never learned to read, translated from a Hebrew original that most scholars in the 4th century decided you did not need to see. If this kind of investigation is what you come here for, subscribe. Every week, another text, another location, another question the removal left open. The mountain is not going anywhere. Neither is the question.